The air in the dining room is thick and sweet, sickly with pumpkin pie and the heavy weight of expectation. It presses down on my chest, making it hard to breathe, harder to swallow the forced smile I've been wearing for hours. The scent of roasted turkey and cranberry sauce feels less like comfort and more like a trap. I can hear the clinking of silverware against porcelain plates, the low murmur of conversations that feel miles away, and beneath it all, the quiet hum of the television in the living room, a distant, ignored presence. My collar feels too tight, the fabric of my shirt suddenly itchy against my skin. My hands are clasped under the table, knuckles white. Every muscle feels coiled, ready to flinch, ready to defend, ready to disappear. The light from the chandelier glints off the crystal glasses, creating fleeting rainbows on the white tablecloth, beautiful and fragile in the tense stillness that has fallen over the table. I look around at the faces, my aunt nodding sagely at something my father says, my uncle laughing a little too loudly at his own joke, my cousins engrossed in their phones. And then I look at my parents, sitting opposite me, their expressions a practiced blend of polite interest and underlying judgment. They are waiting. I know they are waiting. The question is coming, as inevitable as the changing of the seasons, as predictable as the ache in my chest whenever I come home. My heart hammers a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. If you've ever felt this weight, this pressure to be something you're not, tell me in the comments. I read all of them. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. My normal life isn't like this. It's a quiet hum of different kind. It's late nights bathed in the blue light of monitors, the soft click of a keyboard, the low thrum of servers. It's the thrill of an idea taking shape, the frustration of code that won't cooperate, the small victories when a feature finally works as it should. It's building something from nothing, piece by painstaking piece. My apartment is a reflection of this life. Organized chaos, whiteboards covered in scribbled diagrams, books on entrepreneurship stacked beside technical manuals, the constant faint smell of lukewarm coffee. There's a rhythm to it, a solitude that feels earned, a focus that consumes me entirely. It's a world away from this polished dining room, this tableau of traditional success and expected paths. For years, this world I built remained invisible to them. A hobby, they'd called it at first. A phase. Something I'd get out of my system eventually, like skateboarding or that brief, ill-advised attempt at learning the trumpet. They had wanted me to be a doctor, maybe a lawyer. Something with a clear title, a steady income, a trajectory they understood, a life they could brag about at dinners like this. They had laid out the path for me, smooth and paved, lined with sensible choices and predictable outcomes. They envisioned a corner office, a company car, a retirement plan that didn't involve hoping the internet wouldn't break. But my mind had always worked differently. I saw connections they didn't, possibilities in the digital ether that felt more real to me than brick-and-mortar buildings. I started small, building websites for local businesses in college, then delving into software development, eventually finding my niche in creating specialized applications for specific industries. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy to explain. It certainly wasn't what they had planned. The first Thanksgiving I came home after launching my company, it was small, just me and a partner working out of a cramped shared office. The conversation inevitably turned to careers. My cousins were talking about promotions, salary bumps, benefits packages. My parents beamed. When it came to me, I tried to explain. I used words like SaaS, scalability, disrupting the market. Their eyes glazed over. My father cleared his throat. So, he'd said, his voice kind but firm, the kindness somehow worse than disapproval, when are you going to get a real job? A real job. The phrase echoed in my head, a dismissive wave of a hand wiping away years of work, sleepless nights, financial risks, and burning passion. It wasn't just a job, it was my life's work taking shape. But to them, it was invisible. It didn't fit into their neat boxes. It didn't have a corporate ladder they understood. That was the inciting incident, I suppose. Not a single dramatic event, but a slow, grinding realization that the chasm between my world and theirs was wider than I thought. It wasn't just a difference in career choice. It was a difference in understanding, in value. It ignited a quiet fire in me, a determination born partly of passion and partly of a desperate need for them to see. Coming home for Thanksgiving became an annual performance. I'd brace myself at the door, take a deep breath, and step into the arena. The questions started subtly. "Still doing that computer thing?" My mother would ask, her tone carefully neutral, but her eyes holding a familiar skepticism. Then came the advice, unsolicited and unwavering. "You know, our neighbor's son works for a big bank. Very stable. Have you thought about applying there?" I could put in a good word. My father would chime in with cautionary tales of startups failing, of chasing dreams that led to nowhere. "Security is important," he'd say, as if I was gambling my life away in some back alley instead of building a legitimate business. My early struggles weren't just external. They were internal. I'd spend hours crafting explanations, trying to simplify what I did, highlighting the tangible results, the clients we were gaining, the revenue that, while not matching my cousin's bank salary yet, was growing steadily. I'd show them our website, demonstrate the software. They'd nod, smile politely, then pivot back to the weather or local gossip. It felt like trying to explain color to someone who had only ever seen in black and white. I felt invisible, unacknowledged, like the biggest part of my life, the part one poured my heart and soul into, simply didn't exist in their reality. Each visit home felt like a new round in a passive-aggressive battle I never wanted to fight. The questions became sharper, less veiled. "When are you going to stop playing around and settle down? Are you making enough to support yourself? Really support yourself?" The implication was clear. I was failing. I was irresponsible. I was a disappointment. I'd try to push back, listing achievements, mentioning milestones. They'd counter with carefully chosen phrases designed to undermine. "That's nice, dear, but is it sustainable?" Sustainable. The word became a weapon, wielded gently but effectively. It chipped away at my confidence, left me questioning myself in the quiet moments after I'd left their house. The rising challenges weren't just the direct questions, they were the comparisons. "Your cousin Sarah just got partnered at her law firm. Mark is doing so well at his company. They gave him a huge bonus." These weren't just updates, they were implicit criticisms of my own path. The subtext was deafening. "Why aren't you like them? Why aren't you giving us something we can understand, something we can be proud of?" The pressure intensified with every passing year. My company grew, we hired employees, we landed bigger clients. The hobby was undeniable a real business. But their perceptions seemed stuck. They couldn't or wouldn't see it. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was fear for my future, maybe it was simply their inability to grasp the intangible nature of the digital world I inhabited. Whatever it was, their dismissal felt like a constant low-grade ache. I started dreading holidays, invented excuses to miss family gatherings. The thought of facing those questions, that judgment, was exhausting. There was a particular dinner a few years ago, not Thanksgiving, just a regular Sunday roast. I had just closed a significant funding round, a major milestone that validated everything we were doing. I was buzzing with excitement, ready to share the news, hoping this, finally, would be concrete enough for them. I cautiously brought it up. "We just secured funding," I started, trying to sound calm, not overly boastful. My father nodded slowly, buttering his bread. "Funding," he repeated, his voice flat. "So, someone gave you money? To keep playing with computers?" My mother added, "That's nice, dear. But is it revenue? Money coming in from customers?" The distinction, while valid in a business sense, felt like another way to diminish the achievement, to move the goalposts. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. I felt the air leave my lungs, the excitement drain away, replaced by that familiar, heavy disappointment. I remember picking at my food, the taste turning to ash in my mouth. I wanted to scream, to bang my fists on the table, to force them to see the years of sacrifice, the sheer willpower it had taken to get here. But I just sat there, silent, defeated. That night, driving home, I felt the sting of tears, hot and shameful. It felt like everything I did would forever be measured against a standard I didn't meet, a standard they didn't even bother to understand. This was the deepening crisis. It wasn't just that they didn't approve, it was that their lack of understanding felt like a fundamental rejection of me. This year, Thanksgiving felt particularly loaded. My company had reached a critical point. We had just signed a partnership with a major industry player, a deal that was set to significantly increase our visibility and market share. It was a huge deal, a culmination of years of work. And as it happened, the local news channel was doing a segment on innovation in our city, and our company was chosen as a prime example. The segment was scheduled to air during their evening news broadcast, right around dinner time. I had arrived at their house with the usual knot in my stomach. The forced cheer, the predictable questions about traffic and the weather. I hugged my mother, who felt smaller each year, and shook my father's hand, his grip still surprisingly firm. The house smelled the same: roasted turkey, spiced cider, the faint, lingering scent of lemon polish. It was a comfortingly familiar stage for the same old play. Dinner started. The initial small talk was a minefield I navigated carefully. Avoid eye contact when careers were mentioned generally. Nod vaguely when cousins talked about their jobs. But the topic of my career, my computer thing, loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. I ate slowly, trying to focus on the flavors, the texture of the food, anything but the tension building in the air. Then my aunt, well-meaning but oblivious, turned to me. "So, darling," she chirped, her voice cutting across a lull in conversation, "what exactly is it you do again?" The table fell silent. All eyes turned to me. My parents subtly shifted in their seats, bracing themselves, perhaps, for another uncomfortable explanation. I felt the familiar heat creep up my neck. This was it. The moment I dreaded. But something shifted inside me this time. Maybe it was the sheer exhaustion of years of this. Maybe it was the quiet confidence that came from knowing what was about to happen, a secret tucked away like a winning lottery ticket. I looked at their expectant faces, the slight impatience in my father's eyes, the familiar, hopeful skepticism in my mother's. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't try to explain. I wouldn't try to justify. I wouldn't try to earn their approval. I would just wait. I took a slow sip of water, buying time. My mind flashed back to the email confirming the broadcast time, the press release we'd send out, the quiet buzz within my team. I knew, with a certainty that grounded me entirely, that in less than an hour, the world they dismissed would collide spectacularly with their own. "Well, Aunt Carol," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. "It's hard to explain, really. It's in technology. We build things." I offered a small, non-committal smile. My father sighed, a quiet, disappointed sound. "He's being modest," he said to the table, his tone laced with that familiar, patronizing kindness. "It's computers." My mother added, "It's a lovely hobby, dear. Very modern hobby." The word landed like a small, sharp stone. Years later, and it was still just a hobby. The familiar sting was there, but this time, it was dulled by the quiet power of my secret. Yes, I agreed easily, surprising even myself. A hobby. Just building things. The conversation hesitantly moved on. They talked about real estate, about my cousin's upcoming wedding, about retirement plans. I participated just enough to avoid drawing attention. But inside, a different kind of tension was building. It was a coiled spring, anticipation mixed with a strange, cold satisfaction. My gaze kept drifting towards the living room, towards the dark rectangle of the television screen. I knew the news broadcast started at 6 p.m. It was now 5:55 p.m. My father got up to refill his water glass. My mother started clearing plates. The noise level rose as people moved around. And then someone, I think it was my uncle, walked into the living room and casually turned on the TV. The local news anchor's voice filled the space, initially just background noise. I felt a jolt, a physical reaction, but I kept my expression neutral. They were finishing dessert. Apple pie, pecan pie, both smelling heavenly. The conversation was focused on calories and upcoming holiday plans. My parents were engaged in a discussion with my aunt about their winter vacation. The TV was on, a muted presence, showing images of local traffic and weather maps. My heart was pounding now, a frantic, silent drum against my ribs. It was almost time. Any second now. I picked up my fork, but my hand was trembling slightly. I folded my hands in my lap again, taking deep, measured breaths. Don't look at the TV. Don't give it away. Just wait. The anchor finished talking about the weather. And now, she said, her voice bright and professional, a look at how local innovation is putting our city on the map. Tonight, we go inside a groundbreaking tech company that's revolutionizing. My breath hitched. This was it. I didn't dare look directly at the screen, but I could see it in my peripheral vision. A graphic popped up, my company's logo. The dining room fell silent. Not a gradual silence, but an abrupt, stunned cessation of noise. The clink of a fork dropping onto a plate somewhere, a small gasp. My parents, mid-sentence about airline tickets, froze. Their eyes, seconds before focused on my aunt, were now wide, staring past me, at the television screen. The news segment began. It showed shots of our office, the open workspace, employees collaborating, screens filled with code and design mock-ups. The reporter's voice explained what we did, detailing the problem our software solved, highlighting the major partnership we had just secured, talking about the impact we were having on the industry. They interviewed my business partner, they interviewed some of our employees. They used words like innovative, leading, transformative. They talked about our growth, our future plans, the jobs we were creating. I sat at the table, completely still. My gaze was fixed on my untouched pie. I didn't look at the TV, didn't look at my family. I just listened. The reporter's voice, clear and authoritative, filled the silence, narrating my life, my work, the thing they had dismissed for so long. Every word felt like a hammer blow to the wall of their disbelief, a spotlight shining on the invisible world I had built. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see my mother's hand rise slowly to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. My father had gone utterly still, his face pale, his jaw slack. The practiced dismissal, the polite skepticism, the underlying disappointment, it was all gone, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. They looked like they had seen a ghost. Their son, the one with the hobby, was on the news. Not for getting arrested, not for some embarrassing failure, but for leading a successful, innovative company. The segment felt like an eternity, every second stretched thin with unspoken tension. I could feel the weight of their stares, the stunned silence of the room. I didn't feel triumphant, not in a loud, boastful way. It was something colder, deeper. A quiet, absolute vindication. It wasn't about saying, "I told you so," it was about the undeniable, external validation landing squarely in the center of their dismissal, shattering their preconceived notions. The reporter wrapped up the segment, mentioning our name again, emphasizing our local impact. The screen cut back to the news desk. The silence in the dining room was deafening. It hung in the air, thick and heavy, saturated with shock and the abrupt dismantling of years of assumption. My parents were still frozen, staring at the blank TV screen that now showed a commercial for car insurance. Their faces were a study in disbelief. My aunt and uncle were wide-eyed, looking between the television and me. Slowly, my mother lowered her hand from her mouth. She turned her head, her gaze finding mine. Her eyes were searching, bewildered. There was a flicker of something in them, not quite pride yet, more like disorientation. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, seemingly at a loss for words. My father finally stirred. He cleared his throat, a rough sound in the quiet room. "Well," he said, his voice hoarse, "that was something." My aunt found her voice first. "Was that your company?" she whispered, her voice filled with awe. I finally looked up, meeting their eyes. I gave them a small, calm smile. "Yes, Aunt Carol," I said, my voice steady. "That's what I do. Building things." The dam broke. My aunt erupted in excited questions. My uncle started asking technical details. My cousins looked at me with new eyes, a mixture of surprise and maybe, just maybe, respect. And my parents. They were different. The skepticism was gone. The disappointment was gone. Replaced, slowly, tentatively, with something new. My mother leaned forward. "We had no idea," she murmured, shaking her head. "You never told us it was like that." I could have pointed out how many times I had tried, how many explanations I had offered, how many dismissive comments they had made. But what was the point? The television segment, the external validation, had done in 2 minutes what I couldn't do in years. It had made my invisible life, their son's hobby, undeniably real to them. My father, recovering his composure slightly, managed a smile. It was a little shaky, a little forced, but it was a smile. "Groundbreaking," he said, repeating the reporter's word. "They called it groundbreaking." The rest of the evening was surreal. The conversation revolved around the news segment. They asked questions, real questions, about the company, about my role, about the future. They talked about it with the other relatives who called later. There was a newfound respect in their voices, a pride they hadn't shown before. But woven through it all was an undercurrent of awkwardness, a quiet acknowledgement of their previous dismissal. They didn't explicitly apologize, but the shift in their demeanor, the genuine interest in their questions, felt like an unspoken admission. It wasn't the perfect Hallmark movie ending. The years of feeling unheard, of carrying the weight of their disapproval, didn't magically disappear. The vindication was sweet, yes, but it was also tinged with sadness. It shouldn't have taken a television segment to make them see me, to make them proud. The validation I had craved for so long had to come from a source outside our family, a public acknowledgement they couldn't ignore. That felt bittersweet. But standing there, in their familiar living room, watching them grapple with this new reality, a sense of peace washed over me. I had built something real, something that mattered. And, tonight, they had finally seen it. The struggle hadn't been for their approval, not really. It had been for my own conviction, for the right to pursue my path. Their reaction was just the unexpected, public affirmation that the path was valid, even if they hadn't understood it. Leaving that night felt different. The air outside was crisp and cold, a stark contrast to the warm, heavy air inside. As I drove away, I looked back at the house, lights spilling onto the lawn. A small smile touched my lips. It wasn't about winning some argument or proving them wrong. It was about being seen. And sometimes you realize the people who need to see it most are the ones who've been blind all along. The real victory wasn't the TV segment. It was the quiet strength I found in myself, the ability to stand in my truth, even when it was invisible to others. And the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful response is simply to let your work speak for itself. If this story hit close to home, the feeling of striving for validation, the complexity of family understanding, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And please, subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.